Hello and welcome back to Sleepy Hollow Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered from the mists of Sleepy Hollow, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. I was around 4 or 5 when this happened. Back then it was just me and my mom, living on the ground floor of a 6-story block of flats. For a long time, nothing about that place felt strange. No weird noises in the night, no sudden cold spots, no pets acting odd. None of the usual haunted house stuff people like to talk about. If you'd asked me as a kid, I would have told you our home was normal. The only place that ever gave me a bad feeling was the main lobby. You'd come through the main entrance and step into this big stone lobby that always felt a little too echoey, like every sound hung around longer than it should. There was a flat door on the left and another flat door on the right. Straight ahead, at the far end, was the main staircase that went up through the building. I assumed the same layout repeated on every floor, though I didn't really know. I was a little kid. My world was basically our flat, the lobby, and whatever I could see when my mom took me outside. There were probably more flats down there too, maybe through another door I never paid attention to, but I honestly don't remember. I didn't explore. I didn't wander around thinking about building plans. I just knew that lobby as the place you passed through to get home, and it always felt a little grim. And if you hated spiders, you would have hated that lobby. There was this arch where the walls met the ceiling, and it seemed like the perfect place for spider webs to gather. Even if there weren't actually spiders every time, I remember thinking of it as a spider place. That alone was enough to make me walk faster when we came in. Inside our flat, things were simple. It was basically one main hallway with rooms branching off either side, leading into a larger living room at the back. Nothing fancy, just a normal layout. If you walked through the front door, you went a few steps forward, and the first door on the right was my room. If you opened that door and looked to the right, you'd see my bed. My bedroom was small, but it felt like my whole universe. I had my bed, a bedside table, a chest of drawers, a window, and a toy box. The best part, at least to me, was the bunting strung up in the room. It had characters from Pixar's Cars on it. I loved that movie, and I loved that bunting. It made the room feel safe, like it belonged to me. That's the setup. That's how normal everything was. Then one night something happened that I still can't explain even now. I woke up and immediately noticed something was wrong. My teddy wasn't next to me. I had this comfort toy I slept with every night. I called it Snuggle Buddy, though sometimes I called it Mr. Snuggles too. It wasn't a regular stuffed animal. It had a teddy bear head, but instead of a full body, it had a little blanket attached. Like the blanket was the body. My mom gave it to me when I was a baby. She told me later that I used to pull blankets up over my face when I slept, and she worried I might suffocate, so she got me something safer that still felt comforting. Whether that was the real reason or not, I don't know, but I do know I slept with that thing every night. It was as normal to me as a pillow. So when I woke up and couldn't feel it beside me, it didn't just feel like I lost a toy. It felt like something important was missing. I remember thinking I needed it back so I could go back to sleep. It was that simple. I leaned over and looked at the floor, scanning around in the dim light. I found it pretty quickly. It was on the floor near my bed, like it had fallen off. Relief hit me for half a second. I reached down to pick it up. My hand went straight through it. Not like it slipped away. Not like I missed it. My hand passed through the teddy's head like it wasn't solid at all. Like it was smoke or air. I remember trying again, frustrated because I was too young to understand what that could mean. My first reaction wasn't terror. It was annoyance. The kind of annoyed a kid gets when a toy doesn't work the way it's supposed to. I tried to grab it again. Same thing. My fingers didn't close around anything. That was strange, but it still wasn't the part that scared me the most. Because while I was focused on the floor, Something else was in the room with me. I turned my head to the right toward the side of my bed, and I saw him. Even writing this now, I can picture him clearly. He was crouched down low, like he'd bent himself to my eye level. He wore a long black trench coat and a black hat, something like a fedora. His face was covered. I remember it as some kind of mask, and in my memory it looks like a gas mask. Dark, bulky, with a shape that didn't belong in a child's room. His hands were covered too, black rubber gloves, and he was holding my snuggle buddy. He wasn't holding it like he'd picked it up to give it back. He held it close to himself, like it belonged to him now. I remember seeing the teddy's head and the blanket part hanging down. Then he did the worst part. He used the teddy's own arm to wave at me. Not a friendly wave, not a greeting. It felt like mocking, like he was making fun of me for wanting it, like he was enjoying the fact that I couldn't grab it. I can't think of another reason someone would wave a kid's teddy at them in the middle of the night. It wasn't playful. It was cruel in a quiet way. Here's the part that confuses me most. Even now, I don't remember being completely terrified. I remember being fixed on the teddy. I wanted it back. My main thought was simple. Get the teddy, go back to sleep. I was young enough that my brain didn't have the full language for, this is impossible, but I knew something about it was wrong. I reached out toward him, trying to take it. In hindsight, it sounds ridiculous. A grown figure in a mask, wearing a trench coat and gloves, crouched in my bedroom, and I thought I could just take my toy back. But I was a child. I didn't think in survival logic. I thought in needs. My comfort toy was being held away from me, and I wanted it. I can't remember exactly what happened next. Everything gets fuzzy after I reached out. There's no clear memory of him moving, or leaving, or doing anything else. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember running to my mom. I don't even remember climbing back into bed. I only remember waking up the next morning and everything being normal again. The masked man wasn't there. The room looked the same. The daylight made it feel like the night had been a bad dream. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. But then I realized something else. Mr. Snuggles was gone. Not just, I can't find him in the bed. Gone. Missing. I told my mom I couldn't find him, and we looked around. At least, I remember her looking and telling me it would turn up. She didn't act scared. She didn't act like she'd seen anything unusual. It was treated like a normal lost toy situation. For 2 days, my snuggle buddy stayed missing. Then my mom found it while cleaning my room, like it had been tucked away somewhere or slipped behind something. I was so happy to have it back that I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask where exactly she found it or how it ended up there, because at that age, the return of something you love matters more than the mystery of where it went. But as I got older, the memory stayed. For a while, I told myself it must have been a dream. That's what adults say, and it's what you want to believe. But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt too real, too sharp, too exact. The biggest reason I couldn't let it go was something small but specific. The bunting in my room. The car's bunting. When I looked over at the masked man, I remember seeing it clearly in my peripheral vision, hanging exactly where it always hung. I even remember one of the characters on the first flag, some official-looking car, like the mayor. I couldn't tell you the name now, but I remember the placement. I remember the colors. I remember how normal it looked next to something that was completely not normal. That detail bothered me because my childhood dreams weren't that accurate. When you dream, rooms change. Objects aren't where they should be. The layout is close but wrong. In this memory, everything in the room was one-to-one perfect, like I was fully awake. And I remember moving. That matters because later on, when I grew up a bit and started watching ghost hunting shows and reading about strange experiences, I learned about sleep paralysis. I learned about the Hat Man. Shadow figures, people waking up at night and seeing a dark person in a hat standing in the corner, and the way it often comes with the feeling of being unable to move. I told people my story sometimes when that topic came up, because it sounded similar. A dark figure, a hat, a nighttime visitation, something that felt evil or mocking. But the more I learned about sleep paralysis, the more I felt like it didn't fully match what happened to me. In my memory, I moved my arm, I leaned over the bed. I tried to pick up the teddy. I reached out toward the figure. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't trapped in my body, at least not in the way sleep paralysis is usually described. I might have been in some strange, half-awake state, like a trance almost, because I wasn't reacting like an adult would. But I don't remember being unable to move. I remember trying to physically grab what I wanted. And then there's the missing teddy for 2 days. That's the part that hooks into my mind every time I try to dismiss it. If it was purely a dream, why was my comfort toy actually missing afterward? Kids lose toys all the time, sure. And it could have been a coincidence. It could have fallen somewhere weird and my mom found it later. That's the rational explanation. But it's hard to accept when you're carrying a memory of a masked man holding it away from you, waving it like a joke. What stays with me most isn't even the mask or the coat. It's the feeling of being toyed with, not attacked, not chased, just taunted. Like whatever it was didn't need to hurt me to get what it wanted. Like it enjoyed confusing a child who couldn't understand what was happening. Over 16 years have passed since then, and I still remember it clearly enough to picture the angle of his crouch, the dark gloves, the way the teddy's arm moved. I remember the frustration of my hand passing through the toy on the floor, like reality had suddenly stopped obeying rules. I remember waking up the next day with that weird sense of something happened, even before I understood what it might mean. I'm not telling this story like I'm 100% sure it was supernatural. I know how memory works, especially childhood memory. I know how kids can dream in a way that feels real. I know how the brain can blend a real room with a dream event and make it feel like a perfect match. I know the Hat Man phenomenon is common enough that people recognize it across different places and cultures, and that sleep paralysis can create vivid, detailed hallucinations. But I also know what I remember. I was moving, I was reaching, and my teddy was missing afterward. Those details make it hard for me to file it away neatly as just a dream. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I honestly don't know. All I know is that when I was 5 years old, something came into my room, crouched down to my level, held my comfort toy like a trophy, and waved it at me like it thought it was funny. And even now, every time I think about it, I feel that same confusion all over again, like I'm still reaching, and my hand is still closing around nothing. Story 2. For good fortune, I ask you, but if my thoughts ever drift, I give you permission to take me into your fated rift. I spoke those words at dusk, exactly the way the legend said to do it. I was alone on the wooden bridge that crossed the marsh in the park near my home. Red-winged blackbirds perched on cattails. Bullfrogs called out from the mud. The air smelled like honeysuckle and lavender, sweet and clean, like spring was trying hard to convince the world it could start over. I remember thinking how normal it all looked, how peaceful, how the sunset light made the water in the marsh shine in broken pieces, like someone had dropped a sheet of glass and left it there. That's how these things always start, I guess. Not with thunder or screams, with a place you've walked through 100 times, doing its best to look harmless. I first heard about the monochrome man the way most people do, on a playground when I was a kid, from someone who had learned it from someone else. It was the kind of story that made the teller feel important, the kind of story that made the listeners lean in closer even while pretending they didn't believe a word of it. You ever heard of the monochrome man? No. Come here. I'll tell you. The details changed depending on who was telling it, but the core stayed the same. Nobody knew who discovered him first. Nobody knew who first figured out the words that opened a doorway into his world, the black and white place where everything is drained of color, like an old photograph. But if you spoke the incantation with real intention in the minutes after sunset, you made a deal with him. The monochrome man would give you what you wanted most. Not a small favor, not a little bit of luck. Your deepest desire. The one thing you could never say out loud without feeling ashamed. But there was a condition. If your joy ever faded, if you stopped appreciating the gift, if your love of life ran thin, if your gratitude dried up, he would come back to collect you. He would take your soul and drag it into his colorless world. No one could tell you what happened there because nobody ever came back. Some people claimed they'd seen him, though, a tall figure with a pale face, dressed in black, a robe or a coat, depending on who was talking, eyes dark as midnight, an expression that was both serious and uncaring, like your feelings were a minor detail that didn't deserve his time. He lived in a joyless place filled with people who didn't appreciate what he gave them. That was the warning. Take the gift, stay grateful, or you'll end up like the others. A simple little moral story for kids, like a scary version of be thankful for what you have. For 20 years, I treated it like exactly what it was supposed to be, an urban legend. Something teenagers whispered at sleepovers, something someone told around a campfire to make the dark feel alive. A fun story with no teeth, a bogeyman with good branding. I would have kept laughing at it too, if my life hadn't changed. When I turned 30, it felt like the world decided I'd had enough normal years, and it was time to test what I was made of. Tragedy didn't arrive all at once. It came in a line, one hit after another, each one landing before I could fully stand back up from the last. My father died from a massive stroke. One day he was there, stubborn and loud and irritating in the way dads can be, and then he was gone. No warning that felt fair. No long goodbye where you get to say the right things. Not long after that, I lost my job. Not because I was bad at it. Not because I did anything wrong. The company rolled out new tools, started talking about efficiency, and suddenly an AI system could do in minutes what a room of people used to do in hours. I became a cost on a spreadsheet, a line item someone felt good about deleting. A close friend died too, voluntarily. I still don't know how to write that in a way that doesn't sound cold, but that's what it was. One day I got a message that made my hands go numb, and after that the world had one less person in it who had ever really known me. Then someone broke into my apartment and took everything worth taking. Laptop, watch, some cash, even the small sentimental things you assume nobody would want. It felt personal even though it probably wasn't. It felt like the world was reaching into my home to prove it could. And then, as if that wasn't enough, I got diagnosed with a chronic health condition. I won't dump the medical details here. What matters is what it did to me. It made me tired in a way sleep didn't fix. It made mornings feel like a threat. It made leaving bed feel like dragging myself out of deep water. By the time the dust settled, I was still alive, but I didn't feel like myself. I felt like someone who had been hollowed out, like I'd become the outline of a person who used to have plans. So I did what a lot of people do when life stops making sense. I went looking for meaning. I went looking for answers. I tried therapy. I tried meditation apps with calm voices that told me to imagine a warm light filling my body. I tried self-help books that promised change in 30 days if I just believed hard enough. I tried exercise and failed at it, and then hated myself for failing. I tried religion in small doses, like tasting something I'd once believed in and couldn't recognize anymore. Nothing really helped. I'd have short stretches where I felt a little better, and then the heaviness would return, and each time it came back, it felt more permanent. Then one night, after too many drinks with an old friend, she brought up the monochrome man like it was no big deal. You could ask him for help, she said, stirring her ice with a straw. Her voice was casual, like she was suggesting a new restaurant. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. Did you ever try it? She shook her head. No, but someone I knew from church did. She paused, then added almost thoughtfully, she died from unknown causes shortly after. I stared at her, waiting for her to smile, waiting for the punchline. She didn't smile. "Bull," I said. It came out sharper than I meant. My friend lifted 3 fingers together. Scout's honor. That was it. That was all she said. Then we moved on to other things, as if she hadn't just dropped a match into my already dry mind. It should have been a forgettable moment. It should have stayed in the category of drunken talk. But it didn't. It stuck. It planted itself in me, and the next time I was alone with my thoughts, it started growing. A few days later, in the middle of another long stretch of self-pity, I sat at my computer and searched for information about the legend. I expected a dozen dramatic blog posts and at least one podcast episode with spooky music in the background. There wasn't much. A few scattered mentions on creepy forums, a couple vague social media comments, a short thread where people argued about whether the incantation was real and whether it had to be spoken on a bridge or if any body of water would do. I found one image that made me snort. A college student's Halloween costume. A nightmarish mime with white makeup and a black robe. It looked silly, like someone trying too hard. But I couldn't find what I really wanted. A clear story from someone claiming they'd done it. No detailed account, no interview, not even a fourth-hand rumor about how someone's brother's girlfriend's cousin's neighbor died after making the deal. And this is where I made my first mistake. I took the lack of information as proof there was no danger. No news is good news, right? If people were really dying, someone would have made a bigger deal about it. Someone would have documented it. The internet never shuts up about anything. So I convinced myself it was safe. If the monochrome man was real, maybe he was just quiet. Maybe he didn't leave a trail. Or maybe it was all nonsense, and the worst that could happen was that I'd stand on a bridge at dusk whispering old playground words like an idiot. I'd survived worse humiliation than that. At that point, embarrassment barely registered. It was like my body had stopped producing the chemical for it. That's how I ended up on the bridge after sunset, speaking the incantation into the growing dark like a desperate prayer. I believed I was being foolish. But under that, there was something else. Hope. The kind that feels risky because if it breaks, you don't know what you'll do next. For good fortune, I ask you, but if my thoughts ever drift, I give you permission to take me into your fated rift. When I finished, I waited. The marsh kept making its sounds. Birds shifting on reeds, frogs calling, water moving softly, the wind brushing the cattails. Nothing happened. Nobody ever talks about that part of the legend, the waiting. They tell you what to say and they tell you what's at stake, but nobody says how long it takes. I stood on the bridge watching the last light drain from the sky, waiting for a sign that my words had been heard. No sign came, no shadow rose from the water, no figure appeared at the far end of the bridge, no sudden cold, no voice in my ear. Eventually, the embarrassment arrived, after all, slow and heavy. I walked home feeling stupid, feeling childish, feeling like I'd tried to cheat my way out of my own life and failed. Then, over the next few days, things started to change. Not in big, obvious ways, not like a lottery win or an unexpected inheritance. The improvements were subtle, the kind you can ignore if you're not paying attention. It started with sleep. For the first time in a long while, I got a full night of rest that didn't feel like I'd been wrestling my own brain. I woke up and realized I didn't dread standing up. That alone felt like a miracle. Then I ran into a classmate I hadn't seen in years. We met by chance, the kind of coincidence that shouldn't have meant anything, but there was an easy warmth to it, a spark. The kind you notice and then immediately try to talk yourself out of because you don't want to hope for things anymore. We talked longer than we needed to. We exchanged numbers. For the first time in months, I caught myself looking forward to something. A wave of job interviews followed. Not one, but several. Calls returned quickly. People seemed interested in me again. It felt like the world had quietly turned its face back toward me. Within 2 weeks, I had an offer. A desk job at a law firm. Not a dream career, but stable, and stability was what I needed. Then, One night, I had a dream about my father. I hadn't dreamed of him in a long time without waking up sick with fear. Every time he showed up after his death, it had been a nightmare. He'd be angry, or silent, or wrong in some way I couldn't explain. It always left me shaken. This time, he looked like himself. He spoke to me the way he used to when I was a kid, and I'd messed something up, but he didn't want to crush me for it. He told me I wasn't finished. He told me to keep going. I woke up with tears on my face, but not the bad kind. Looking back, it seems obvious. It seems almost embarrassing how obvious it was. Those weren't random bits of good luck. That was the gift. But I didn't attribute it to the monochrome man. That was my second mistake, and it was the one that mattered. Because if I had connected the dots, I might have guarded my gratitude. I might have treated joy like a job, like something I had to keep up with, not because I wanted to perform happiness, but because I understood the cost of letting it slip. Instead, I just accepted the improvements like they were finally my due, like life had decided to stop bullying me. I let myself believe it was coincidence, or fate, or the universe apologizing. And then weakness showed up the way it always does, quietly, in the middle of the night. It happened at 2 a.m. during a thunderstorm. The city outside my window was being hit with rain hard enough to sound like gravel thrown against glass. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, and I could feel that familiar voice crawling back into me. You know the voice, the one that doesn't scream, just whispers. The one that takes every good thing and finds a way to poison it. It reminded me of everything I'd lost. It reminded me of all the ways I didn't deserve improvement. All the reasons the recent luck must be temporary. It told me I was fooling myself, that I would end up back in the same hole, and that I'd only made things worse by letting myself hope. I stayed awake for hours listening to it, unable to shut it off. I tried to distract myself, tried to think of anything else, but every thought I had seemed to get pulled back into that same ugly direction. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, crossed the room, and threw my window open. The rain hit my face. Cold and sharp, I leaned out and howled into the night like an animal. Not words, just sound. Pure frustration, pure helplessness, all the anger I'd kept locked behind routine and manners. And then, as if my howl had embarrassed the storm, the rain stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. The block went quiet. No cars. No distant voices. Even the wind seemed to pause. The clouds broke apart, and the moon slid out like it had been waiting. Its light spilled over the street, turning everything silver. In that sudden stillness, I heard a sound that made my stomach turn. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like flesh tearing, a wet, ripping noise that echoed down the boulevard and bounced between buildings. I leaned farther out, scanning the street. At the corner, under the streetlight, stood a figure. He was tall, too tall in a way that didn't immediately register as impossible, just wrong. His shape looked stretched. His dark clothing didn't absorb the light the way black usually does. It produced a strange effect, like the fabric was covered in sequins that caught the moonlight. Except the flashes weren't bright. They were dull gray, like static on an old television when there's no signal, that restless, grainy shimmer. He turned his head slowly, like he felt my attention before he saw me, and I saw his face, chalk white, not pale like a sick person, not made up like a clown, white like paper, white like bone. The shadows around his eyes were deep enough that I couldn't tell what was inside them. I honestly can't say he had eyes. I told my friend about it the next day because I needed someone else to hold the story for a moment, to keep it from swallowing me whole. She listened with that tired look people get when they've heard you spiral before. "You didn't really see anything," she said. "You're exhausted. You're stressed. You're always like this. You get paranoid, and then you fixate on the negative until it takes over your life." Then she said the thing that hit hardest. "You shouldn't have done that stupid incantation." We argued. Not gently. I was so tired and raw that my defense turned mean. I pushed too hard, made it sound like she was insulting me on purpose. She pushed back. Old resentments surfaced, the kind you keep buried because they're embarrassing to admit out loud. We ended the call angry. That was a week ago, and I still haven't apologized. Not because I don't know I should, but because my ego keeps telling me that apologizing would mean admitting she was right. It's amazing what pride can do, even when you're afraid. That night, the monochrome man came again. Not outside, not at the street corner, in my apartment. I was in bed, restless, staring at the same spot I always stare at when I can't sleep. The corner of my room where the shadows collect. It's a place where the dark looks thicker than it should, like it has weight. Some nights I used to imagine stepping into that corner and falling through it into a black infinity. Strangely, the thought had comforted me. The idea of disappearing felt restful. But as I watched, something pale appeared in that corner. A shape, white and rounded, slowly pushing forward like it was breaking the surface of water. My body froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink properly. Fear ran through me in waves, but my muscles didn't respond. It was like my mind and body had been separated, and my mind was trapped as a witness. The pale shape became clearer. A head, chalk white, smooth and wrong, with empty eye sockets or eyes so dark they might as well have been holes. It stared at me without blinking, and the longer I looked, the more it felt like those empty spaces weren't just looking at me. They were inviting me, pulling at me, like gravity. I tried to scream at him to go away. I tried to say anything, leave me alone. I didn't mean it. I take it back, but my throat was too dry and my tongue wouldn't work. No sound came out, not even a whisper. So we stayed like that, me in bed, stiff with fear, him in the corner, half formed in the shadow, patiently watching. It lasted until dawn. When the sunlight finally reached that corner, the shadow thinned, and he thinned with it like a stain fading. The room became normal again in the cruel way it always does after terror, leaving you with nothing to prove it happened, except the way your body still shakes. Since then, strange things have been happening to me at random moments. Sometimes a cold wave slides over my skin, even when the day is warm. Not the normal kind of chill, but a sick, feverish cold that rises from inside. Sometimes, at the edge of my vision, color starts to drain away. It doesn't disappear all at once. It bleeds out slowly, like ink being washed from fabric, leaving the world gray at the corners while the center stays normal. When I turn my head fast to catch it, sometimes I see something else for just a second. Not my city. A flat, black and white landscape, a desert stretching to the horizon, with no detail, no softness, no life. The sky, the color of old paper. The ground, the color of ash. In the middle of that emptiness stands a single tree. No leaves, no green, bare branches twisted and dark, like the knobby fingers of an arthritic hand reaching out for something that will never come close enough to touch. And beneath that tree, like a guard who never gets tired, stands a tall shadow man with a pale white face. He stares back at me without eyes, and even when the vision snaps away and I'm back in my bright, living world, I can still feel the promise hanging in the air, calm and absolute. If my thoughts should drift, I'd permit you take me into your fated rift. I made the deal for good fortune. Now I'm learning what it really means to drift. Story 3. It was 1988, and I had just turned 11. I remember that year clearly because I was on a mission, the kind that felt life or death when you're a kid. The small mountain town where I grew up held a peddler's fair every year on the first weekend of September, and word had gotten to me that this one might change my life. The town itself always felt like it was stuck in an older America, not in a cute touristy way, more like it simply didn't care what the rest of the world was doing. People still waved at each other on the street. Folks still left their doors unlocked in the daytime. A lot of the adults acted like the modern world was some distant problem meant for bigger places. That weekend, the whole valley smelled like grilled meat, spilled beer, popcorn, and dust. The fair brought in vendors from outside town, and for 2 days our little community park turned into a maze of tables and tents. The place looked like something off a postcard. Bright canopies, families walking slowly with paper plates in their hands, kids running wild, and old men standing around with their arms crossed as if they were judging everything. Deadwood Mountain rose over everything, dark and heavy, like it owned the town. The park sat near the river, which curved along the southern edge of the grounds. Thick oak trees dotted the grass, big enough to throw wide shadows even in the middle of the day. In one corner, there was a sandy playground area with slides, seesaws, and that huge metal spinner that always made someone throw up if they stayed on too long. On either side of the playground stood 2 concrete block bathrooms that looked like they'd been built in the 1950s and never updated since. The vendors' tents were lined up in neat rows down the center of the park. Their canopies were old, slightly crooked, held up by thin poles and hope. Around the edges were the food sellers, barbecue smoke, churros, popcorn, kettle corn, and booths selling soda and beer in plastic cups. The adults moved slowly from table to table, chewing on tri-tip sandwiches and burnt churros, scanning for bargains like treasure hunters. A lot of people came to the fair with the same fantasy, that this year, somehow, someone would be dumb enough to sell a priceless antique for $5. I watched them pick things up, squint, put things back down, then move on with the focused look of people convinced the next table would hold a miracle. Oak leaves drifted down here and there. A pack of kids played a game where they ran between adults and tried to catch the falling leaves and stuff them into their pockets before the leaves hit the ground. They acted like it mattered, like it was a competition with real stakes. In the middle of the park stood an old gazebo, sun-bleached and weather-worn. A local band was playing there, the kind of band that played the same set list every year because nobody cared enough to ask for anything new. Tinny microphones made their voices sound like they were coming through a cheap radio. They were doing the Mamas and the Papas and Jefferson Airplane. The lead singer, a leathery woman in a sundress, shook a tambourine that didn't match the beat. The smell of patchouli floated near the gazebo, thick enough to make my eyes water. My mom had a name for that smell. She called it hippie stink. I was only half paying attention to any of it because I had $20 in my pocket and a head full of Star Wars. The night before, a friend had called and told me there was a booth selling old Star Wars toys for next to nothing. I had saved those $20 carefully, like it was a fortune. I didn't spend allowance casually, not back then. I saved for one thing at a time. And that week I had been thinking about a new figure, a vehicle, anything I could add to my collection. So I walked the rows with my eyes wide, scanning tables like a hawk. I expected to spot an X-Wing, a battered Millennium Falcon, a box of loose action figures, something, anything. As the sun started slipping behind Deadwood Mountain, the park lights came on one by one, throwing yellow pools across the grass. The fair didn't shut down early. People liked to wander into the evening with food in their hands and music in the background. The lights made everything feel warmer than it actually was. It was early September, but the mountain air got cold fast once the sun was gone. I checked every booth. Then I checked them again. Then I checked them a third time, moving slower and slower, my hope draining out of me. By the time I reached the end of the rows for the third pass, I had to admit the truth. My friend had probably been messing with me. It wouldn't have been the first time. Some kids thought it was funny to watch me get excited about nerd stuff, especially in that town where being into anything that wasn't hunting or sports made you a target. I was wandering without a plan when I heard a voice that hit me with fear, stronger than any nightmare I'd ever had. Kevin Anderson. I didn't even have to see him to know it was him. Some people have voices like a warning bell. I turned my head slowly, my stomach tightening. Kevin was there with his 2 friends, Mike and Chris. Kevin was almost 15 and starting 8th grade again. Everybody in town knew that. Everybody in town knew a lot of things about Kevin because he made sure people did. He was big, nearly as tall as my dad, and built like the kind of kid who didn't need to be smart to be dangerous. He had stringy patches of facial hair on his red face, like his body was trying and failing to turn him into an adult. His teeth were a dull butter yellow. When he talked, he spit. It was the first thing you noticed when he got close. Kids called him the gleeker behind his back. He'd been a problem for me since I moved to town from the city the year before. For whatever reason, he seemed to enjoy making my life miserable. Maybe I was an easy target. Maybe I looked like someone who wouldn't fight back. Maybe he just liked the feeling of power. Kevin and his friends were laughing and pointing at a vendor with huge glasses who was selling old used Playboy magazines sealed in plastic bags like they were rare collectibles. The whole thing felt greasy and sad, but Kevin thought it was hilarious. I tried to melt into the crowd and drift away. I kept my head down, moved like I belonged, and walked in the opposite direction, toward the south end of the park. My heart pounded the whole time, because even when Kevin wasn't looking at me, I felt like he might decide to look. That's when I saw something I had never seen in our town before. A mime. He stood near the edge of the grass, away from the booths, dressed like an old-fashioned tramp. Baggy clothes, worn shoes, a black beret drooping to one side. His face was covered in white makeup, but it didn't hide the rough 5 o'clock shadow along his jaw. The makeup on top of it looked gray and smeared. There was a yellow patch sewn onto the front of his beret, like he'd tried to repair it with whatever he could find. He didn't look like a cheerful street performer. He looked like a man who had been living hard for a long time and decided to paint his face anyway. And he was working with an invisible dog. A small group of kids sat in the grass, watching him like he was the only thing in the world. Next to him on the ground was an old sea bag, open, with a little hand-painted sign propped against it. The sign showed a simple drawing of the mime and the dog, and underneath it said, Artaud and Henri, the invisible dog. I forgot about Star Wars. I forgot about Kevin. I forgot about everything except what I was seeing. I sat down on the grass with the other kids. For a few minutes, the fair noise faded into the background. The mime moved with careful, practiced motions. He made it look like the dog was pulling on a leash. He made it look like the dog was stubborn, then excited, then proud. He threw an imaginary stick and watched the dog fetch it. He acted annoyed when the dog misbehaved, then acted relieved when it listened. And the strangest part was that it worked. Not because I believed in invisible dogs as a fact, but because the mime made it easy to believe in the moment. Our imaginations did the rest. When he reached into his pocket and pulled out an invisible treat and held it out, every kid leaned forward as if we could actually see the dog sit and wait. When the mime rewarded Henri, the kids clapped. I clapped too, smiling despite myself. There are moments when you're a kid that feel pure in a way adult life rarely does. Moments where you forget the world can be cruel. Moments where you're totally inside something simple and wonderful. That was one of those moments. Artaud pulled out an old harmonica and started playing. We watched an invisible dog dance to music we couldn't hear, but the mime's body language made us fill in the sound anyway. He finished with a big flourish, then put his hands over his ears and acted overwhelmed by our applause. Then he showed us how to clap silently, palms meeting without sound, and we copied him, giggling. He bowed deeply, his beret nearly touching the tops of his floppy shoes. That's when I heard Kevin laugh. "Look at this," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Kevin and his friends had wandered over. They stood just behind the seated kids. I thought about standing up and running, but Kevin wasn't looking at me. Not yet. His attention was on the mime, like a cat noticing something fragile. Kevin stepped through the group, walking right across the grass like we weren't there, and stopped beside Artaud. "Is this your dog?" Kevin asked, pointing at empty air near the mime's feet. Artaud smiled and nodded enthusiastically, committing to the act like it mattered. And then Kevin did something that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. He kicked the invisible dog. Artaud's face changed instantly. The smile vanished, His eyes widened in silent shock, and he bent down, reaching like he was trying to protect something. Kevin shoved him aside. Mike and Chris followed, and suddenly all three of them were beating Henri, kicking and stomping empty air with ugly laughter. The kids around me started crying. Some screamed. The older kids yelled at them to stop. I yelled too, but my voice sounded small even to me. Kevin grabbed the dog with both hands, lifted it like it had weight, and hurled it toward the river. Artaud lunged after it. Without hesitation, he ran and threw himself into the water, splashing hard. Rain hadn't been falling then, but the river was cold all the same. He came up cradling nothing in his arms, holding it to his chest like it was real, rocking back and forth as if he could keep it alive by refusing to let go. He was silently weeping, shoulders shaking. The white makeup ran in wet streaks down his face. The black makeup under his eyes sagged and smeared, making him look like something sad and haunted. Kevin and his friends laughed so hard they almost couldn't breathe. For a moment, though, Artaud lifted his head and stared at them with an intensity so sharp it made the hair on my arms rise. His hands trembled as they held Henri. His eyes looked full of rage. The air around him felt charged, like before lightning. Kevin noticed it too. So did Mike and Chris. They hesitated just for a second. Then they turned away, still laughing, proud of themselves, feeding off the cries of the younger kids who ran toward their parents. I stayed seated on the grass, afraid to move, afraid Kevin would suddenly remember I existed. When the bullies finally drifted away, I watched Artaud carefully. He laid Henri gently on the ground beside the old sea bag. He rolled up his sign and slid it into the bag. Then he began packing up his props. That's what I thought at first. Props. He reached down and lifted something I couldn't see. He folded it. He shoved it into the bag. The bag shifted, bulging strangely, as if it was actually filling with real objects. He packed more nothing, and the sea bag swelled into lumpy shapes like it was stuffed with odd tools and hard-edged equipment. The more he packed, the more the bag looked ready to burst. I couldn't explain it. I just stared. Finally, he pulled the drawstring tight and heaved the bag over his shoulder. His knees buckled as if it was truly heavy. Then he bent down and scooped up Henri with one arm. Careful, gentle, and started walking down the dirt path out of the park. I watched him until he disappeared. I don't think I'd ever felt that kind of helpless anger before. Not just at Kevin, but at the fact that people could ruin something magical and then walk away laughing. The world had always been unfair, I guess. But at 11, you're still surprised by it. I eventually shook myself out of it and headed back to my bike. I'd hidden it in the narrow alley behind the grocery store because kids in my town stole anything that wasn't locked down. I was almost there when I realized something else. I was being followed. I heard a voice behind me, close enough to make my skin crawl. "Where do you think you're going, you little pussy?" I turned. Kevin stood in the alley with Mike and Chris. The single overhead light cast most of the alley in shadow, and they stepped out of the darkness into the light like they were entering a stage. I felt my body go cold. I knew I couldn't outrun them. I knew they'd grab me before I reached my bike, so I did the only thing my fear could come up with. I raised my fists. It was pathetic. Even I knew it. They laughed. "You want to fight?" Kevin said, stepping closer. "Let's fight." It hit something in the air between us with a dull thud, like punching a wall covered in cloth. Kevin jerked back, yelping, though the sound didn't reach me the way it should have. Blood sprayed from his knuckles and hung in the air for a second, then slid downward in a straight line like it was running down glass. Like there was a window between us. Kevin's mouth moved in a furious shout, but I heard nothing. No curse, no scream. It was like the sound had been cut off. Mike and Chris stepped forward too. They pressed their palms out, pushing into empty space. Their hands flattened against something solid but invisible. They shoved and slammed at it. They tried to move sideways, tried to go around. They couldn't. An invisible box held them in place. They were trapped inside it, banging on the walls, their faces twisting with panic, mouths moving in silent rage. They screamed for help, but the alley was quiet except for their muffled impacts. I stood there shaking, unable to understand what I was seeing. Then I saw him. Our Todd waddled into the alley like he'd been there all along, like this was just the next part of his routine. He walked up, dropped his heavy sea bag on the ground, and wiped his forehead like a laborer setting down a real load. He looked at me and smiled. He lifted a hand and gave me a small, friendly wave, like we were sharing a secret. Then he turned to the trapped boys and began rummaging through his bag. He pulled out something large with both hands. Whatever it was, it made his shoulders tense, as if it had weight. He carried it to the side of the invisible box and pressed it against the air. Then he started turning it. A crank. I didn't see the crank at first. I understood it by the way his arms moved, by the way his wrists rotated in a steady circle. He turned it with exaggerated effort, like an old man working a machine. And as he did, the invisible box began to shrink. The walls moved inward. The ceiling lowered. Panic exploded inside the box. Kevin and Mike and Chris backed up into each other, eyes wide, pushing outward with their hands. But the walls didn't care. They tried to squat, but the ceiling came down. They tried to spread out, but the walls forced them together. They begged. They pleaded. Their mouths formed words I couldn't hear. Their faces went red with terror. Artaud glanced at me and winked. Then he turned the crank faster. The walls closed in tighter. The three of them were crushed together, forced into a shrinking space with no escape. Their bodies pressed and contorted in ways that didn't seem possible. The air inside the box fogged from their breath, thickening like steam. And then, at the moment when it seemed there couldn't be any space left at all, they popped. There's no cleaner way to say it. They burst. The invisible box filled with red, thick spray like someone had thrown paint inside a sealed container. For a heartbeat, the red hung there, smeared across unseen walls. Artaud kept turning the crank until the box was no bigger than a small cube, the size of a lunchbox, maybe smaller. A tight red shape sat on the pavement like a solid block. He stopped turning, satisfied, and placed the crank back into his bag. Then he crouched down, pinched the red cube between his fingers like it was nothing, and tossed it into an open dumpster with a casual, almost playful motion. He pulled up his pants, then bent and lifted his bag again. It looked as heavy as ever. He walked toward me. I didn't know if I should run, scream, faint. My whole body was locked up with fear. I was sure he would do the same thing to me, or worse. And the worst part was that I couldn't even imagine what worse might look like. Artaud stopped close enough that I could smell him. Sweat, old clothes, something like grease paint. He frowned at me at first, studying my face. Then his expression softened. He smiled, reached out, and gently tousled my hair like a grandfather. It was such a normal gesture that it made my eyes sting with confused tears. Then he turned and looked down the alley. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. No sound came out, but a moment later I noticed something on the pavement near my shoes. Wet paw prints, small ones, fresh and clear, as if a dog had just run through water and dashed down the alley. The prince moved past me and continued on, running alongside our toe as he walked away with his heavy bag. He didn't look back. He just disappeared into the night, and the paw prints followed him until the alley ended and the streetlights swallowed everything up. Story 4. Mom, you made the shower water way too hot, I said, standing in the doorway with my towel in my hands. Good thing I dipped my finger in first, she replied like she was proud of herself. My skin would have burned. I had to mix in a lot of cold water to lower the temperature. She smiled, almost like this was a sweet moment between us. I thought you'd love it. Nobody wants to burn, Mom, I said, already tired. My head was still foggy from waking up, and I didn't have the energy for one of her strange moods. She gave a soft giggle, the kind that would have sounded normal if the words weren't so wrong. Well, I do. I stared at her. I couldn't tell if she was joking, but her eyes didn't look like they were playing around. They looked calm, comfortable. I frowned. I don't have time for this. I'm going to be late for school. I grabbed my backpack from the chair, slung it over my shoulder, and headed for the door. Bye. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my chest, like something in the world had shifted slightly while I slept. The neighborhood looked the same. Same houses, same streets, same trees. But the silence between sounds felt heavier than usual. As I walked towards school, I told myself my mom was just being weird again. Sometimes she said things that didn't make sense. Sometimes she laughed at things that weren't funny. It wasn't new. Still, that sentence kept replaying in my mind. Well, I do. A few blocks later, I saw two students standing near the side of a building close to a classroom window. At first, I thought they were just messing around, maybe trying to pry something loose. Then I got closer and my stomach dropped. One of them was holding a broken shard of window glass. The other had his hand out, palm up, like he was offering it. They weren't threatening each other. They were taking turns. I stopped so suddenly my shoes scraped the sidewalk. "What are you doing?" I shouted. They looked up at me like I'd interrupted something fun. Both of them were grinning. "You want to try?" one of them asked. "It's fun." "That's stupid," I said, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "Why would you do that?" They laughed like I was the weird one for asking. "Why not?" the other one said. And he said it so casually it chilled me, like he was talking about trying a new snack. I wanted to grab the glass and throw it away. I wanted to call a teacher. But the first bell was about to ring and I could already see other students passing by, not even slowing down, not even looking twice. Like this was normal. Like kids cutting their hands before class was just another part of the day. My skin prickled. I backed away. "You're insane," I muttered, and walked inside. The hallway was loud with voices and footsteps, but something felt off there too. People were laughing too hard, their faces were too bright, their eyes looked too awake, like they were all running on some strange kind of excitement. I got to my classroom and stepped inside. At first it looked normal. Desks, backpacks, the teacher's table up front. Then I saw my friends. One of them was sitting with both hands flat on his desk, fingers spread. He was looking down at them like he was waiting for something to happen. Another friend stood beside him holding a compass, the kind we used for drawing circles in geometry. The metal point was pressed against the skin of his friend's hand. I froze. "Hey, stop," I said, but my voice came out thin. "It's a game," the friend with the compass said without looking at me. His tone was light, playful. "It's dangerous," I insisted, moving closer. "That thing is sharp. It can go through," and then it did. The compass point drove straight through the center of my friend's palm, like it was nothing, like skin was paper. I heard a sound that I'll never forget. Not a scream, not even a gasp, just a small, wet pop, the kind of sound you should never hear from a human body. My own hands started shaking. "You have to go to the medical room now," I shouted. I expected him to cry. I expected him to jerk his hand away and panic. I expected blood and fear and yelling. Instead, he laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a forced laugh. A real one, like he'd just watched the funniest video on his phone. He pulled his hand up and showed the compass poking through it to the rest of the class like it was some kind of prize. People leaned in, smiling, impressed. A few even clapped. My throat tightened. I looked around the room, hoping for one normal reaction. One person horrified. One person running to get help. But the teacher wasn't even in yet, and the students were acting like this was entertainment before class. I stepped in front of my friend, trying to block him from showing it off. "Take it out," I said. "At least take it out. Wrap it with something. You're bleeding." Blood was running down his hand in slow lines, dropping onto the desk. He didn't seem to care. He didn't even flinch. He kept laughing, like the pain was a joke being told directly to him. I grabbed a cloth from my bag and shoved it toward him. "Here, tie this around it, please." After I kept insisting, after I basically begged, he finally pulled the compass out. The metal point slid free, leaving a clean hole that made my stomach twist. He wrapped the cloth around his palm, not because he looked scared, but because I wouldn't stop talking. Then the bell rang, loud and sharp. The whole class quieted like nothing happened. The day crawled. Every hour felt wrong. In the halls, I saw students slamming their shoulders into lockers for fun. I saw someone pinch their own arm until it bruised, and then smile at the mark like it was a reward. A girl in the cafeteria pressed her finger against the edge of a hot tray until the skin turned red. She stared at it with a dreamy look, like she was warming herself by a fire. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. Maybe there was some new online trend. Maybe people were just being reckless because they were bored. But I'd lived in this town my whole life. I knew these people. They weren't all the type to do stupid things just to look cool. It felt like something had gotten inside them, like the idea of pain had become sweet. By the time school ended, my head hurt from holding in fear. I just wanted to get home, lock my door, and pretend the day wasn't real. I walked with my friends like usual because even though they were acting strange, being alone felt worse. The sky was already shifting into late afternoon, and the sunlight made everything look slightly orange, like the world was warming up. One of my friends kicked a pebble along the road and said, almost casually, "Let's stand in the middle of the road. When a car comes close, we'll dodge at the last moment." He said it the same way someone might say, "Let's race to that tree." The other friend's eyes lit up. "It'll be great." I stopped walking. My heart started pounding. "What the hell is wrong with you guys today?" I said. "Are you out of your mind? We can't do that." They both looked at me with that same smile I'd seen all day, like I was the one missing out. "If you don't want to," one of them said, shrugging, "you can leave." I glanced down the street toward my house. It wasn't far, but the sun was sinking lower, stretching shadows across the road until they looked like long, dark fingers. And after everything I'd seen today, those shadows felt alive. The idea of walking alone made my skin crawl. So I hesitated. I turned back to them, trying to think of something, anything, to say to stop them. But I was a second too late. They stepped out into the road like they owned it. I opened my mouth to scream at them again, and that's when I heard it. The growl of an engine coming fast, too fast. A car was speeding toward them, not slowing, not swerving. Its headlights flashed on the shiny pavement. My friends laughed, actually laughed. At the last moment, they tried to jump back. They moved quickly, but not quickly enough. The car clipped them just enough to throw them off balance, just enough to send them tumbling to the ground. The car didn't even stop. It kept going, disappearing down the road like it had hit nothing more than a bump. I ran to them, my backpack bouncing against my back, my breath tearing out of me. "Oh my God, are you okay?" I shouted, dropping to my knees. They were on the road, twisted awkwardly. One of them held his arm like it was loose in the wrong way. The other was trying to sit up, his face scraped, blood smearing his cheek. "This is why I was stopping you," I yelled, panic making my voice shake. "This is exactly why." They looked up at me, and they smiled. Even though they could barely stand, even though their bodies were clearly hurt, they smiled like they'd just gotten away with something fun. "What?" one of them said, breathing hard. "We're fine. Don't you see?" He laughed again, and the laugh didn't match the pain on his face. It didn't match the way his leg dragged when he tried to move. I felt sick, not just scared, confused in a way that made the world feel unstable, like the rules of being human had changed, and I was the only one who didn't get the update. I helped them up anyway. I couldn't just leave them there. I half-carried one, supporting his weight as we limped down the street. I dropped them at their homes, watching them stumble inside, still smiling, still acting like the accident was a prize they'd won. By the time I reached my house, my arms ached and my hands were sticky with their blood. I went inside and turned on the TV, not because I cared what was on, but because I needed noise, something normal, something that didn't laugh at pain. A little while later, my mom came into the living room with snacks on a plate. Her hand was wrapped in bandages. I stared at it. What happened to you? I burned my hand while making lunch, she said, setting the plate down like it was nothing. I exhaled, relieved for half a second. Accidents happened. Burns happened. Normal. By mistake, right? I asked. She looked at me and smirked. Well, not really. The air in my chest felt like it stopped moving. What do you mean, not really? I shouted, standing up so fast the couch cushion snapped back. She leaned closer like she was about to share a secret. Her eyes were wide, bright, and excited in a way that didn't belong on my mother's face. You know, she said softly, pain gives us comfort. She smiled as she said it, like it was a warm truth, like it was something people had always known. My heart started racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a moment I couldn't tell if I was about to cry or throw up. I'm going to my room, I said, forcing the words out. My mind isn't okay today. I went upstairs and shut my door. I sat on my bed staring at my hands. I kept thinking about how normal today had started. A hot shower, a simple argument. Now it felt like the entire town had become a different place. I tried to scroll on my phone to distract myself, but my fingers were trembling. Every few minutes I could hear my mom downstairs humming to herself like she was having a good day. Hours passed in a blur. Then my phone rang. It was one of my friends. I answered quickly. What happened? I asked, because something in my stomach already knew it wasn't going to be good. His voice sounded excited, almost breathless. You know the volcano near the jungle? He asked. I sat up straighter. That volcano was part of the landscape, something we all grew up around. It wasn't supposed to do anything. It was just there, distant, quiet, like a sleeping animal. Yes, I replied, my eyes narrowing. It has erupted, he said. For a second, my brain didn't understand the words. Then the meaning hit me like cold water. What? I whispered. I ended the call immediately, my thumb slipping on the screen. I ran downstairs so fast I almost missed a step. Mom, we have to go, I shouted. She looked up from where she was sitting, calm as ever. Why? The volcano, I said, barely able to breathe. It has erupted. She blinked, like I'd told her the weather was changing. So what? We will die if we stay here, I yelled. She stood slowly. Her smile came back steady and sure. Nothing will happen, she said. In fact, we are going there. I stared at her. What? Are you insane? It will burn our very bones. I know, she said, like that was the best part. I can't wait. It's going to be so fun. Then she reached for me. Her hand, bandaged, burned, came toward my arm, and I felt pure panic explode in my body. I tore away from her touch. No, I screamed, and I ran out the front door. Outside, the world had turned into a nightmare that didn't need darkness to hide in. The sky over the jungle was stained with thick smoke. In the distance, beyond the line of trees, there was a glow, a living orange light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And the villagers were outside, not running away, walking toward it. They moved like they were going to a festival, like they were heading toward music and food and fireworks. Some of them were talking to themselves. Some were laughing. Some held hands like this was a family trip. The sound of it, so many people cheerful in the face of disaster, made my skin go cold. I ran down the street trying to push through the crowd. Stop, I shouted. Go back. What are you doing? No one listened. Some turned their heads and smiled at me like they were inviting me along. The heat in the air grew stronger the closer we got. Ash drifted down like dirty snow, landing on shoulders and hair. The ground felt faintly unsteady, like something huge was shifting beneath it. Ahead, the lava had already reached the forest. Trees were on fire. Animals that should have been running were trapped in the glow, their shapes moving and collapsing in the smoke. The smell was awful, burning wood and something else underneath it that made my eyes sting. Yet people kept walking forward, mesmerized. I pushed through until I bumped into my friends. Their clothes were dusty, their faces bright with the same wild excitement I'd seen all day. I grabbed one of them by the shoulders. "We should go," I begged. "My mom's gone insane. She wants to burn in that lava. The whole village wants to burn in it." They looked at me like I was speaking a different language. "What do you mean, everyone's gonna burn?" one of them asked, and his smile widened. "Don't you want to burn in it too?" "Why would I?" I started, but my voice broke. I already knew. They were too far gone. Whatever had changed inside them had turned fear into desire. Then the earth shook. At first it was a small tremble, like a truck passing nearby. Then it got stronger, violent enough to make people stumble. The buildings around us groaned, their walls cracking. A loud rumble rolled through the ground and into the air like thunder trapped underground. Someone laughed behind me, thrilled by the shaking, like it was part of the show. I tried to move away from the buildings, but one of my friends grabbed my arm, holding me in place. "Look," he shouted, his eyes shining. "Isn't it amazing?" "No," I screamed, yanking back. "Let go." I shoved him as hard as I could and stumbled backward just as one of the nearby buildings started to collapse. It didn't fall slowly, it dropped like it had been cut at the base, crushing down in a cloud of dust and debris. My friend was right there. The sound of the impact punched the air out of my lungs. Dust exploded outward. For a second, I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything except the ringing in my ears and the distant roar of the volcano. When the dust cleared, I saw what was left. My legs went weak. My hands flew to my mouth, but no sound came out. The scene didn't feel real. It felt like my brain refused to accept it, like it was trying to protect me by pretending I was still in class, still watching some stupid game with a compass. But it was real. My friend was gone. Another scream rose in the distance, then turned into laughter. People were still walking forward through falling ash, through shaking ground, toward the fire like it was home. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to save. I didn't know how to stop an entire town from walking into a volcano with smiles on their faces. So I ran. I turned away from the crowd and sprinted in the opposite direction, pushing my legs until they burned, until my lungs felt like they were ripping. I ran down the jungle road, past trees coated in ash, past the smell of smoke and heat. Behind me, the laughter followed, floating through the haze like a chorus. I kept running until I reached a bridge. It was an old one, cracked and trembling, stretching over dark water that moved slowly below. Parts of it looked broken, like the earth shaking had pulled it apart. The rail was bent. The boards were uneven. The whole thing shivered under my feet like it might fall apart at any second. I stopped at the edge, chest heaving, and looked back. In the distance, through smoke, I could still hear them. The villagers, laughing, their voices rising and blending together, not even turning into screams as the fire swallowed them. Like the burning was exactly what they wanted. My friends had died in front of me. My mother had become something else. Something wearing her face, speaking in her voice, but with a hunger that didn't belong in any human heart. I looked down from the bridge toward the sea. The water was cold, dark, and endless. The waves moved in slow rhythms like breathing. It didn't look happy. It didn't look welcoming. But it looked quiet. And quiet was all I wanted. The ocean felt like an escape from the heat, from the madness, from the smiles that didn't match the injuries, from laughter in places where there should only be fear. The volcano behind me roared again, and the bridge trembled under my feet. I made my choice. If the world was going to end, I didn't want it to end in fire, surrounded by people who loved suffering. I stepped forward and jumped, choosing the cold embrace of the ocean over the blazing hunger of the volcano. Story 5. I still remember the way I walked into that bookstore, like I had done 100 times before. It wasn't some special day. It wasn't storming outside, and there was no weird feeling in the air that I noticed at first. It was just work. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the place settle around me the way it always did. The store was quiet in that soft, familiar way. My little computer speakers played lo-fi beats at a low volume, the kind of music that fades into the background until you don't even realize it's there. A wax melter sat near the register, and it filled the whole shop with lavender. That scent, mixed with paper and dust and old wood shelves. If you've ever worked somewhere long enough, you know what I mean when I say the building starts to feel like it has its own breath. My job was simple. Sit at the counter, greet people, ring them up, put things back where they belong. I spent most days doing a lot of nothing in between. I'd wipe down the counter even when it wasn't dirty. I'd straighten stacks of books that didn't need straightening. I'd check my phone and pretend I wasn't bored out of my mind. Not long after I settled in, the bell over the door jingled, and one of our regulars walked in. He came in around the same time almost every day. He wasn't old, but he wasn't young either. One of those people who look like they've already decided the world isn't worth too much excitement. He always wore the same kind of jacket, always kept his head a little down like he didn't want to meet anyone's eyes for too long. He never caused problems. He never stayed long. I watched him out of habit as he moved through the aisles. He didn't greet me, but that wasn't unusual. He just wandered the shelves, scanning spines, stopping every now and then to pull something out and flip through it. That's when I noticed it. On a display table near the front where we usually put new arrivals or featured books, there was a book I had never seen before. That alone wasn't strange. Vendors came by sometimes and dropped off new titles, or the manager would bring in boxes and set up a display. I didn't memorize everything that came in, so it was normal to see something unfamiliar. But this book looked wrong in a way I can't fully explain. It was solid black, not glossy, not textured, just black, like it swallowed the light around it. The only thing on the cover was green lettering, the kind of green that makes you think of old computer screens or glow-in-the-dark paint. There was no picture, no tagline, no author name. It should have looked boring. It should have blended in. Instead, my eyes kept sliding back to it like a magnet was pulling my attention. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just curiosity. People get curious about weird things all the time. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the lavender smell was making me feel too calm and too unfocused. The regular came up to the counter with a book in his hands. I picked it up and scanned it, doing my usual act of friendly small talk, because that was part of the job. A guide to cooking, huh? Trying out some new recipes today? I asked. He barely reacted. He didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't do anything except shrug. Yeah, I guess so, he said. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I handed him the receipt, he took the book, and he walked out. The bell jingled again and the door shut, leaving me alone with the shelves and the music and the smell of lavender. I looked back at the display table. I can still see that green text in my head. I can see the shape of the letters the way they seemed to sit on the cover like they were pressed into it. But I cannot remember what they said. It's like my brain refuses to hold on to the words. I remember being annoyed by that later because it didn't make sense. How could I remember the color, the feeling, the exact way it caught my eye but not the title? And the missing author bothered me too. Most writers want credit, even if the book isn't popular. A name on a cover is the whole point, but this book had nothing, just that green lettering and the blackness around it. I forced myself to get back to work. I wiped down the counters. I ran a cloth along the shelves, even the ones no one looked at. I swept the floor, then reorganized a few sections just to pass time. After a while, I ended up behind the counter again, scrolling through my phone and waiting for the next person to walk in. But the book kept tugging at my mind. Every time I looked up, I glanced at it again. I'd try to focus on something else, but the moment I relaxed, my attention would drift right back. It felt less like I was choosing to think about it, and more like something was placing the thought there. Eventually, I gave in. I told myself I was being stupid, that it was just a book, and if it bothered me so much, I should just pick it up and read the back. I walked over and lifted it off the display. The first thing I noticed was the weight. It was heavier than it should have been, like there was something inside besides paper. Not like hidden compartments or anything normal like that. More like the book had density that didn't belong to it. Then I felt the warmth. Not the normal warmth you get from something sitting in sunlight. Not the warmth of a cheap battery-powered device. This was a steady heat, like the book had its own body temperature, like it was alive. A book should not feel warm in your hands. Paper should feel cool. Cardboard covers should feel neutral. This felt like I'd picked up something that was breathing. A tight, uncomfortable feeling crawled up my spine. Instinct took over, and I set the book back down faster than I meant to. I walked away like I was leaving something dangerous behind. I went back to the counter and tried to laugh it off in my head. I told myself I'd imagined it. Maybe the wax melter was putting out more heat than I realized. Maybe I'd been holding my coffee, and my hands were warm. I made excuses the way people do when they don't want to admit something is wrong. A few minutes later, the bell jingled again. A customer came in, walked right past the display table, and didn't even glance at the black book. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made things worse. Because it wasn't like the book was hidden. It was right there in the front, where anyone would notice it. It stood out from the other bright covers. But people acted like it wasn't there. Their eyes slid over it without pausing. One woman even leaned close to that table to pick up a different book, and her hand moved right next to the black one without touching it, like her brain didn't register it as an option. The bell jingled again and again as more people came in. Each time I watched, each time nobody looked at that book, it felt personal, like the book was only for me. Then a kid came in, probably early teens. He moved like he owned the place, like he was daring someone to tell him he didn't belong there. He leaned on the counter and said, "Hey, where's the manga at?" I sighed without meaning to. I looked up from my phone. "It's in the back left of the store," I said, pointing. He stared at me like he wanted me to get up and walk him there. "Well?" he asked, impatient. I pointed again. He finally walked off, and I went back to my screen, but my mind was still on that display table. I kept half listening to the kid's footsteps and half watching the front area where the black book sat like a piece of night. When he came back, he had a stack of manga in his arms, and it was obvious from the covers that they weren't meant for a kid his age. "Hey," I said. Before I could stop myself, "Are you even allowed to be reading these? Why don't you mind your own business, loser? Just ring out my mangas already." I rolled my eyes and took his money. He walked out. The bell jingled. The door shut, and I was alone again. The day kept going that way. People came in, browsed, asked questions, bought things, left. I did my job like a machine. But every time there was a pause, every time the store went quiet, my attention drifted back to the black book. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt like being watched. Not by a person, by an idea. Like the book was aware that I was resisting it. Even now, thinking about it, I can feel that pull again. It's hard to describe unless you've experienced something that shouldn't exist. It was like the book was a thought I couldn't fully shut out, like an itch under the skin that you can't reach. I lasted longer than I expected. I kept telling myself not to touch it. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but I could only pretend for so long. At some point, when the store was quiet and no one was near the front, I stood up and walked to the display table again. I picked the book up. The warmth was still there, stronger this time, or maybe I noticed it more. It spread into my palms and up my arms, slow and steady, like warm water rising around you in a bathtub. Except this wasn't comforting. It felt wrong. It felt like something was entering me. I carried it back to the counter, holding it low so customers couldn't see too clearly, like I was doing something I wasn't supposed to. I told myself I'd just peek inside, one look, then I'd put it back and forget about it. I opened the cover. The moment the book cracked open, the air around me seemed to change. The lavender smell faded, not completely, but like it was suddenly far away. The lo-fi music sounded muffled, as if someone had put a wall between me and the speakers. My skin prickled. My fingers tightened around the pages without me realizing it. I looked down, and it wasn't like reading normal print. Images moved across the page, but not like a flipbook or some fancy printed illusion. They weren't drawings exactly. They were scenes, living moments. Creatures with wings flew through a sky that didn't look like any sky I'd ever seen. They circled and dove and screeched in a language that made no sense to my ears, and yet some part of me understood it anyway, the way you understand tone even if you don't know the words. The sound wasn't coming from the speakers. It was in my head, and it was also in the air. It was everywhere at once. My hands started to shake. The pages felt hot now, and the heat wasn't just on the surface. It felt like energy was pouring out of the book and into me, like it had been waiting for skin contact. The ground trembled under my feet. I noticed it immediately because the counter vibrated slightly, and a pencil rolled a tiny bit. But when I looked up, no one else reacted. A couple customers were browsing like nothing was happening. One man was reading a back cover, calm as could be. If the floor was shaking for them, too, they didn't show it. That terrified me more than the shaking itself. I looked back down at the book, and I realized I hadn't turned a page. I had been staring at the same opening spread, locked in place, unable to look away. It felt like time had slowed down, stretched thin, wrapped around me. Then a voice cut through the fog. "Hello? You there?" Ground control to Major Tom. I blinked hard. My eyes burned like I'd been staring at a bright screen too long. I looked up and saw a customer standing at the counter, watching me with concern. Behind him were two more people, waiting in a small line. "You seemed pretty into that book," the customer said, trying to sound light about it. My mouth went dry. I glanced at the computer screen and the clock. My stomach dropped when I realized how much time had passed. At least 15 minutes. Gone. And I hadn't even moved. "Yeah, sorry," I said quickly, forcing my hands to close the book. The moment it shut, the muffled feeling lifted a little. The lavender came back. The lo-fi music sounded normal again. The store felt like the store. But my heart was still pounding. I rang up the customers, apologizing a little too much, thanking them for waiting. One girl smiled in a way that made me think she assumed I had just spaced out. "Don't worry about it," she said. "Happens to me all the time. I once burned my dinner so bad it set off the smoke detector and called the fire department for me." I laughed weakly like that was funny. My hands didn't stop shaking until after they left. When the store finally emptied again, I did what I always did for lunch. I flipped the sign to say I'd be back soon, locked the door, and pulled down the shade halfway. I should have eaten. I should have stepped outside and gotten air. I should have done anything except stay alone with that book. Instead, I set it on the counter in front of me. I stared at it for a long time, like it was a wild animal, and I was trying to decide whether it would bite. Dread sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and cold. But there was something else too, something I hated admitting. I wanted to open it again, not because I thought it would be fun, not because I thought it would teach me something. I wanted to open it the same way people want to press on a bruise or look over the edge of a cliff. Some part of me needed to know what it would do. I opened the book again. The energy hit me immediately, like stepping into a strong current. My fingers went numb and then too sensitive, like they couldn't decide what to feel. That strange language filled my head again, and this time it didn't stay in the background. It pushed forward, urgent, demanding. Words formed in my mind, and before I understood what was happening, my lips were moving. I repeated the words out loud. They were strange syllables that didn't fit together in any way I knew, and yet I spoke them smoothly, like I'd practiced. Worse than that, they felt familiar. The rhythm of them hit something deep in my memory, like an old lullaby from childhood. Something you don't remember learning because it was given to you before you could talk. I still can't remember those words now. I don't think I'm allowed to. And even if I could remember them, I wouldn't write them. You have to understand that. Writing them feels like it would be the same as saying them again. As soon as I finished speaking, there was a sharp sound, like glass snapping under pressure. I jolted upright so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. I looked around, expecting to see a broken window or maybe a dropped mug. But nothing was broken. At first, I thought I was safe, and then I saw it. A crack. Not in the wall, not in the ceiling, not on any surface that made sense. It hung in the air, thin as a hair, slicing straight through the space in front of one of the bookshelves. It ran across my entire field of vision like a line drawn through the world. Behind it was something else. I don't have words for what was behind it because my brain keeps trying to turn it into something normal. But it wasn't normal. It was like looking through a tear in a painting and realizing the canvas hides a moving machine underneath. The crack widened with another sound like splitting glass. The bookshelf behind it didn't fall. It didn't get pushed back. It was simply divided, perfectly split down the middle, as if the crack had cut the idea of the shelf into two separate things. I stared, frozen. Then I noticed something even worse. A loose piece of paper drifted in the air from the counter where I'd disturbed it, and it floated right across the crack without changing at all. It didn't tear. It didn't burn. It didn't even flutter differently. It passed through like the crack wasn't there. But I could still see it, like the crack existed only from my eyes or from my mind, like it was a door that only I could recognize. The crack grew wider and the sound of it grew louder. A constant painful noise like reality was grinding its teeth. The space beyond it came into clearer view, and my stomach turned. A sky the color of sickly green stretched over a landscape that didn't look like Earth. Shapes rose in the distance that might have been buildings or might have been bones. The air looked thicker, like fog mixed with light. And moving through that world were the winged creatures I'd seen in the book. At first, they flew by, not paying attention. They moved like they belonged there, like the air itself loved them. Then one of them slowed mid-flight and turned its head. It looked straight at me. I felt it like a hand on my throat. The creature's eyes weren't eyes the way ours are. They were too deep, too aware. It didn't just see my body standing there. It saw everything behind me. It saw me. It opened its mouth and screeched. That was the first time I heard it clearly, and I wish I hadn't. The sound was sharp enough to feel physical, like it could cut through skin. The crackling, grinding noise of the tear in reality mixed with that screech until my senses overloaded. My vision swam. My knees gave out. I hit the floor hard, palms stinging, and I started begging without meaning to. Not praying, not bargaining, just pleading like a child for it to stop, for me to wake up, for this to be anything except real. But it didn't stop. The world outside the crack flashed into my mind in pieces, like someone was forcing images into me. I saw temples under green skies, massive and old, their stone covered in symbols that made my teeth hurt to look at. I saw a green sun beating down on empty courtyards that felt like they were waiting for blood. Then I saw nights with stars that looked wrong, too bright and too sharp, like holes punched through purple cloth. I saw people kneeling, not in love or worship, but in fear so strong it had become their whole culture. And I understood, without anyone telling me, that there was a God behind all of it. Not a God that cared, not a God that guided, something ancient and hungry. Something so terrible that it could erase a whole civilization the way you wipe dust off a shelf. Quick, casual, without emotion, if it wasn't kept satisfied. The creature drew closer to the tier, and as it did, the crack started branching out like a spider web. Thin lines spread across the air around it, and each one made that awful glass-splitting sound. More creatures gathered behind the first, circling, watching, curious. The first one leaned in. It reached toward me. Its arm slid through the crack like it was pushing through water, and for a moment I thought it wouldn't fully cross, that maybe the barrier would stop it. But it didn't. Its hand came through into my world. The hand was cold, not cool like metal, cold like a deep space, cold like a freezer burn that goes straight to the bone. It wrapped around my arm, and the grip was tight enough that I cried out. I tried to pull away. I grabbed the leg of the counter with my free hand and held on. I dug my fingers in so hard my nails bent back. I kicked at the floor, trying to get traction. It didn't matter. The creature pulled, and the crack pulled with it, widening like a mouth opening. I felt the air change pressure, like the room was being sucked toward that tier. I heard sounds that didn't belong together. The groan of wood, the crack of glass, the low rumble of something huge shifting. And then I heard something that made me understand fully that this was real. I heard the fabric of reality strain. I don't mean that as a metaphor. It sounded like cloth being pulled too tight, fibers snapping one by one. The air itself seemed to protest, like the world didn't want to tear but couldn't stop it. With one final, horrible shatter, the barrier gave way. I was yanked through. For a fraction of a second, I saw the bookstore from a distance, like it was a picture held up in front of me. Then it broke apart. Not in a normal collapse. It turned into shards like glass, sparkling and floating. Pieces of shelves and floor and ceiling reduced to glittering fragments. They swirled around me and then dissolved into nothing, as if the place had never existed at all. The shock of it stole my breath. I tried to scream, but couldn't. My throat locked up, and the only sound that came out was a thin, useless whimper. Then the other world solidified around me. The green sun hung low, casting a sick light over stone structures that rose like mountains. A temple stood in the distance, and even from far away I could feel it. Power radiated from it the way heat radiates from fire. Except this wasn't warmth. This was pressure. It made my skull ache. It made my thoughts feel small. The sky shifted as the sun began to set. The green faded into darker shades, and then the whole world slid toward purple twilight. The colors looked wrong together, like they shouldn't exist in the same spectrum, but they did. I was dragged forward into a tunnel that led into the temple. The ground under me wasn't dirt or stone the way I expected. It felt too smooth, too old, like something worn down by centuries of footsteps and fear. I barely had time to look around. The creatures moved me like I was nothing, like I was already dead. Inside, the air was thick with a smell I can't compare to anything on Earth. It wasn't rot, it wasn't sulfur. It was something older, something like the scent of a deep cave, mixed with the metallic edge of blood. They threw me into a cell. The door, if you can call it that, wasn't bars or a lock. It was a slab of material that looked like stone, but moved like muscle. When it sealed shut, I felt the finality of it settle into my bones. Time passed strangely in that place. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, hours, days. It didn't feel like normal time. The light outside the cell shifted in slow waves, and the air hummed with distant sounds that made sleep impossible. I kept thinking about the bookstore. I kept thinking about that moment when I opened the book. I kept thinking how stupid it was that I had convinced myself I needed to know. Then I saw it, a crack inside the wall of my cell. At first, it was just a thin line. I crawled toward it, heart racing, and pressed my face close. The line widened slightly, and through it I saw something I couldn't believe. I saw me, not a reflection, not a memory. A younger version of myself, standing in a place I recognized. A room from my past, before I ever worked at that bookstore. Before I ever knew that black book existed. He looked tired in the normal way. Not the way I felt now. He looked like someone who still thought the world made sense. The crack wasn't big enough for me to climb through. I pushed at it until my fingers hurt. But it didn't widen. It held firm like it was never meant to be an exit. But it was an opening. And if an opening existed, maybe something could pass through it. A message. A warning. I don't know how I got the materials in here. Maybe the same force that wants this loop to continue also enjoys giving its victims the illusion of hope. Maybe it likes watching us struggle. Or maybe there are rules even it has to follow, and cracks always leave something behind. Either way, I found a way to write. And I wrote this for you. The version of me on the other side of that thin tear. The one who still has a chance to make a different choice. They're going to take me out of this cell soon. I can feel it in the way the air changes, in the way the distant sounds grow louder. I think I'm waiting to be brought to the temple, to be used as an offering to whatever that thing is. I don't think it's just a god in the way people mean it. I think it's something worse. Something that wears the shape of a god because that's the only shape our minds can understand. So listen to me. Do not take the job at the bookstore. I don't care if you need money. I don't care if it seems easy. I don't care if you tell yourself you'll only do it for a few months. Do not walk into that place like it's harmless. And if you ever see a book on display that is solid black with green lettering and no author name, do not touch it. Don't pick it up just to see. Don't open it just for a second. Don't tell yourself you're being dramatic. Run. Run like the whole world depends on it. Because it might. Because once your fingers feel that warmth, once those pages open and that language finds your mouth, the crack will find you, and when it does, no one else will see it until it's too late. I don't know if sending this through is enough to change anything. I don't know if you can break out of this timeline, or if the crack will always lead you back to me, back to this cell, back to the temple and the green sky and the waiting creatures. But I have to try. If you're reading this and you still have the chance to walk away, then walk away now. Please. Hopefully it isn't too late for you. Story 6. I work from home, and I need to say that first because it matters later. I don't want you to picture me as someone who was never there, someone who missed the signs because they were out living a busy life somewhere else. I was there. I was always there. That's part of what makes this hard to explain without sounding like I'm trying to excuse myself. My desk is close to the front window, close enough that if I lean back in my chair or turn my head just slightly, I can see the house next to mine. I don't even have to stand up. I don't have to try. The view is simply part of my day. Like the corner of a TV screen you aren't watching, but still notice. 5 days a week, most weeks of the year, I sat there with my laptop open, doing my work, and that house was always in the side of my vision. The man who lived there was named Gene Walcott. I know that now. I didn't know it then. For a long time, he was just the old man next door, a presence more than a person, like a tree that's been there longer than you have, so you stop thinking about it as something that could ever change. I moved to Dresher, Ohio 2 years ago. For one reason, the rent was $400 a month. That's it. I had a job I could do from anywhere as long as the internet didn't cut out too often. I do UX work, which is a fancy way of saying I help shape what apps look like and how they feel when you use them. If you've ever used an app and thought, this is easy, or this is annoying, or why would they put that button there, someone like me probably had a hand in that. It pays well enough. It keeps me indoors. It lets me disappear in a way I didn't even realize I wanted until I got it. When I chose Dresher, I didn't pick it because I wanted a new start in a friendly small town. I didn't pick it because I had family nearby, or because it had good schools or nice parks. I picked it the way you grab something cheap from a clearance rack. It fit what I needed. It cost less than anything else. It didn't ask me questions. The neighborhood is quiet. The houses sit close together, but not in a cozy way. More in a way that says the lots were cut too tight, like someone tried to squeeze one more house into every space they could. From my place, if I look out the window, I can see Gene's porch and a slice of his front yard and the driveway that runs along the side of his house. It isn't a wide view, but it's enough to notice patterns. It's enough to notice when something changes. I used to see him sometimes in the mornings, especially on days when I forced myself to go outside to get the mail. That was often the only time I stepped out. I'd open my front door, take 3 steps down, and there he would be on his porch, sitting in a green plastic chair, the kind you can buy for a few dollars at a hardware store. He always had a coffee mug in his hand, but I can't remember ever seeing him actually drink from it. He held it like it was part of the sitting, like it completed the picture. We didn't talk. We didn't introduce ourselves. Most of the time, we didn't even smile. We would look at each other, and one of us would give a small nod. Sometimes I think I nodded first. Sometimes I think he did. Maybe it happened at the same time so often that it trained our bodies to do it together. It was the smallest possible form of acknowledgement. Less than a wave. Barely a gesture. Just enough to say, yes, you exist. And I see you existing. I didn't think much about it. He didn't seem lonely, not in a dramatic way. He just looked like an old man sitting on his porch, watching the day start. And I was someone who didn't want company. Someone who liked a life where you could live next to a person and never learn their name. It didn't feel wrong. It felt normal in the way modern life feels normal, even when it's quietly broken. The first thing I noticed wasn't him. It was his porch light. Gene's porch light seemed to be on some kind of timer. It came on at dusk and shut off in the morning. I didn't consciously track it, not at first. I just absorbed it the way you absorb the sound of a refrigerator humming in the background. You stop hearing it until one day it changes, and then you realize you knew the rhythm all along. In October, one morning I glanced out my window and saw that the porch light was still on. It was already around 10. The day was bright, the kind of clear fall day where the sky looks washed and thin, and the sunlight makes everything sharp. The light looked wrong against it, a pale orange glow that seemed sickly when it had to compete with the sun. It didn't belong there. It made the house look tired. I remember thinking, that's odd. Just a small thought, no alarm, no urgency. I went back to my laptop. The next day, it was still on. And the day after that, at some point, I registered that this wasn't a one-time mistake. The light wasn't turning off. The porch was lit all day long. I want to tell you that I felt a jolt of concern right then, that I stood up and knocked on his door, or called someone, or did the thing a better neighbor would do. But the truth is uglier and simpler. I didn't do anything. I didn't even feel much, not at first. It bothered me the way a crooked picture frame bothers you. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's wrong in a small, irritating way. I told myself he must be gone. Maybe he was visiting family. Maybe he was in the hospital for a few days. Maybe the timer broke and he didn't notice. I realized later how absurd that is. Of course, he would notice his own porch light burning all day. But it was easier to believe there was a normal explanation than to admit I didn't know enough about him to guess what was normal in his life. Then, there was the recycling bin. In Drescher, recycling pickup happens on Tuesdays. People wheel their blue bins out to the curb, and by the afternoon, the street looks clean again, like nothing ever happened. After one Tuesday, I noticed Gene's bin was still out there. It sat at the curb empty, its lid open just enough to catch rain. Over the next few days, it collected water. A little at first, then more. The water went still and began to darken. In the cool fall weather, it didn't evaporate. It just sat there, gathering a thin film that looked yellowish when the sun hit it. Something about it felt more wrong than the porch light. The light could be a broken timer. The bin meant nobody had brought it back. A few days passed, then a full week. Then another Tuesday came and went, and Gene's bin didn't move. I wheeled mine out. I wheeled mine in. His stayed where it was, like a marker that nobody had touched his life in a while. Here's what I did about it. Nothing. I did my work. I answered emails. I made small adjustments on screens that people would look at and never consciously notice. I moved a button a few pixels. I changed the wording on a prompt to sound friendlier. I sat in the same chair at the same table and told myself I was busy, or tired, or that it wasn't my place to interfere. I ordered food more often than I should have because delivery meant I didn't have to talk to anyone. The drivers would leave bags on my porch and walk away. I watched TV shows with plots that slid out of my mind as soon as the credits rolled. I went to sleep. I woke up. I did it again. Days passed like that, quiet and identical. All the while, his porch light stayed on. His recycling bin stayed at the curb. And Gene Walcott stayed inside his house 8 feet away from me in a situation that I'm going to describe plainly because I think it matters to say it plainly, and because someone should, even if it's only me. He was sitting in his recliner. He had been sitting there for about 19 days. The coroner later estimated 17 to 21 days. But I keep coming back to 19 because it's the middle number, because it feels like the closest thing to certainty in a story full of guesses. 19 days in a chair, in a room, in a house, in a town where other houses sit close enough to hear a neighbor cough through the wall at night. 19 days while I sat at my desk, 10 feet from my window, looking toward his porch and then looking away. I wasn't the one who found him. A kid found him. I didn't know the kid's name either. 15 or 16 maybe. Someone said they lived a block over. Kids in this town cut through yards all the time because it's quicker than walking around. That day, the kid cut through Jean's yard on the way to the gas station, and they smelled something that didn't belong in the crisp fall air. I don't know the exact sequence after that. I know the kid went up to the side door and knocked. I know the door opened because it wasn't locked. Maybe it was already unlatched. Maybe the kid pushed a little harder the second time. The details get fuzzy when people retell them, and everyone retells stories like that in a way that makes them feel safer. But the fact is, the kid went inside. Then the kid came back out and sat down on Jean's porch steps. They didn't call anyone right away. They just sat there, hands on knees, looking out at the street. Someone told me later that the kid didn't even pull out their phone at first. They just sat. That detail stuck with me because it felt like the most honest reaction in the world. Not screaming, not running, not immediately turning it into a report. Just sitting down in the place where the dead man used to sit, trying to hold themselves still long enough to understand what they'd seen. I was at my desk when the police arrived. I saw the first 2 cars pull up. I watched the officers get out, move with that focused pace people adopt when they want to look calm and in control. Then the ambulance arrived, though there was no urgency to it. The lights weren't frantic. The doors didn't fly open. It was just procedure. Then a county van came. I watched through the window like I was watching a scene in a show, except it was my neighbor and it was real, and the distance between us was the distance of one wall and a short stretch of yard. I saw people go in. I saw them come out. At one point, one of the paramedics stepped off the porch and stood in the yard with his hands on his hips, breathing through his mouth. He stood like that for a while, not talking to anyone. Just breathing like he was trying to get something out of his throat, like the air itself had become something he couldn't swallow. Nobody knocked on my door. Nobody asked me if I knew Gene, if I'd seen him recently, if I'd noticed anything strange, if I'd seen the porch light stuck on or the recycling bin left out. I don't know if they spoke to other neighbors. I think they must have, but I wasn't included, even though I was right there. It's hard to explain what that felt like without making it sound like I'm complaining that I wasn't treated like a main character. It wasn't that. It was more like being shown a mirror I didn't know existed. I realized, standing there behind my window, that I had already started to vanish from my own street, the way Jean had vanished. Not because I did anything dramatic, not because I told people off or slammed doors or announced I wanted to be left alone. Just because I stayed inside, because I didn't talk, because I didn't build any connections strong enough that someone would think to knock on my door in a moment like that. I learned Jean's name from the local Facebook group, not from a conversation. Someone posted about it, sad news on Merryweather Saint. There were a handful of comments, a couple heart reactions. Someone said they'd gone to high school with his ex-wife, and wasn't it awful? A few people wrote that they were praying. Nobody wrote, I knew him. Nobody wrote, I talked to him last week. Nobody wrote, I'm going to miss him. The post sat there between a photo of someone's new deck and a warning about a coyote near the elementary school. It got some reactions, then slid down the feed and was replaced by an argument about whether the town needed another Dollar General. I read every comment. I didn't leave one. I didn't write anything like, I live next door. I didn't write, I saw his porch light. I didn't write, I'm sorry. I just watched it happen like everything else, through glass. That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop, and I wrote about it. Not for Facebook, not for attention, I wrote because my head felt full in a way it never does. My work is all tiny phrases, tiny decisions, tiny edits. UX writing is mostly about guiding people without them realizing they're being guided. 3-word prompts. Soft language that moves you forward. Get started. Learn more. You're all set. It's writing designed to make people feel like everything is under control. But that night, nothing felt under control. And I wrote like I needed to name the pieces before they disappeared. I wrote about the porch light burning into morning. I wrote about the recycling bin filling with rainwater and the way it looked like a small, quiet accusation. I wrote about the nod we used to exchange, that smallest unit of human acknowledgement, and how it had felt like enough at the time. I wrote about the kid sitting on the steps. I wrote about the paramedic breathing through his mouth like he couldn't get the taste out. I wrote for 2 hours. It was the most I'd written about something real in years. When I finished, I stared at the screen and felt the urge to post it somewhere, anywhere. There's a particular kind of comfort in strangers. Strangers let you be honest without consequence. They don't know you. They can't show up at your door. They can't hold your history against you. You can give them words and receive a reaction, and it feels like connection without the risk of actually being connected. There was nowhere I truly wanted to post it. I could imagine putting it on the Facebook group, but then I pictured the comments, prayers, heart emojis, someone saying, "How sad," and then a shift into something else. A coyote, a deck, a Dollar General. I imagined putting it on some writing site, but then it would become content, and the thought of that made me feel sick. So I closed the laptop. I didn't post it. Not then. I'm posting it now because something changed between that night and this. One, and I need to tell you what it was, because it's the part that turned this from a sad story about a neighbor into something that started pressing on my own life like a hand on the back of my neck. The county cleaned Gene's house out on a Thursday. A professional service came, the kind that handles situations like his. A white van pulled up. 2 men in coveralls went in and out with equipment and bags. For 3 days, they left industrial fans in the windows. Even from my house, I could hear them, a steady mechanical rush, like a constant exhale. After that, there was a lockbox on the door. A realty sign went up in the yard from a company out of Columbus. The porch light was off. Someone had finally turned it off, or the bulb had finally burned out. And then the house was empty. The green chair was gone. The porch looked stripped and flat, like a face without features. The yard looked normal again in a way that felt wrong because it suggested nothing had happened there at all. The street kept moving. Cars passed. Leaves fell. People took their bins in and out. The world did what it always does, which is keep going without waiting for anyone to catch up. I sat at my desk and turned my head and looked at Gene's dark porch. And I had a thought that came so clearly it felt like someone else had placed it in my mind. I am 8 feet from that house. I sit here every day. If I stop sitting here, if I stop being present in my own life the way Gene stopped being present in his, how long would it take before someone noticed? How many days would my porch light be wrong before it mattered to someone? Who is on the other side of my walls listening for a sound that has stopped? The answer came immediately, before I could soften it or argue with it. Nobody. I knew it was nobody because there is no one in my routines. No neighbor who chats with me, no friend who drops by, no family member close enough to notice I've gone quiet. The only people who interact with me are the ones who deliver things, and even they don't actually see me. They see a porch, a door, a place to leave a bag. That night, I opened my phone and scrolled through it like I was searching for proof that I was wrong. My recent calls were all work. 4 calls in the last month. My texts were mostly muted group chats that I never replied to, full of messages from people who had learned to talk around my absence. Then there was a thread with my sister. 11 days earlier, she had sent me a photo of her dog.